Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. So today we're very excited and lucky to have Amy Ogan, who is the Thomas and Lydia Moran Assistant Professor of Learning Sciences from the Human-Computer Interaction Institute at Carnegie Mellon University, join us. And she's an educational technologist who's basically focused on ways to make learning experiences more engaging, effective, and enjoyable. She has won many awards for her work in educational technologies, and her work has been funded by everywhere from the National Science Foundation, Google, to the Jacobs Foundation. So we're really excited to have Amy here today and to welcome her as the second to last speaker in our HCI Distinguished Lecturer Series. And we're super excited to hand it over to you, Amy, now to take it away with your talk, Pushing the Boundaries of Learning Technologies. Welcome, Amy.
Thanks so much, Martini. It's really wonderful to be here with all of you and looking forward to your questions. It would be lovely to be in Chicago on this beautiful day. Hopefully next time around we'll be in person. So yes, I want to talk today about pushing the boundaries of learning technology. So let's look at how high and how low we can go, and in order to support learners in having more equity in their learning opportunities. And this is really critical because we are in the midst of an education breakthrough. And what I mean by that is you can see here in this graphic of the millions and millions of students who are now in school who were not a mere 2 decades ago. So this is even old data. This is from 2013, but there are far more than this today. So millions more students in school across the world, every region of the world, and particularly in West and Central Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. So this is fantastic, but we are also in a learning crisis at the moment. And in particular, that's because COVID has forced almost, probably at this point, 2 billion students to be learning from home. Schools are going in, they're going out, and many students are actually not learning at all because of this crisis situation. However, this was not just a crisis caused by COVID. If you look at this graphic from 2016, we see that there are millions and millions of children out there who will not actually even learn basic primary level skills, despite being in school themselves. And I'd like to be very clear that this is not just a problem of low-income countries. It's also true in middle-income countries, although the ratios might be different, and in high-income countries where 30% of students will learn only basic primary level skills. So this is a problem that affects everyone around the world, although not equally. One thing that has been tried to fix this problem are solutions that rely on technological determinism, like providing one-to-one computing devices. This approach has gotten technology into the hands of many more learners around the world, but it hasn't successfully addressed the learning crisis over more than a decade of trying and more than $1 billion that we've spent on this. So we are stuck with this problem, and yet there is hope. Here's just some random set of learning outcomes that have been found when we introduce technology. So students in grades 2 to 4 gain 3 times in their reading fluency with a project called Project Listen compared to typical reading practice. Socially adaptive robots can produce 30% more math learning than non-adaptive robots. Peer tutors give significantly better help to their fellow students when supported by an AI, and so on and so forth. There's a litany of positive results of technologies that have been produced over the last 2 decades, and that includes low and middle income country contexts. So here is a very wide-ranging study done by Kahn in 2017 that showed that adaptive technology-assisted learning interventions have a greater impact on learning in sub-Saharan Africa than a litany of other options that we might be trying, such as decreasing class size, just giving school supplies, reducing school fees, and another number of other approaches that have been tried. So this is a meta-analysis of all of the studies that have been published in sub-Saharan Africa on education interventions. So there is good evidence that learning technologies can actually support equity if we design them to, and if we meet each context where it's at in order to support equity with our learning technologies in that context. So, where are we? Myself in particular, I've had the privilege to be able to study this problem across a wide set of countries in a large number of contexts, everywhere from the US to Latin America, Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa in Tanzania, Cote d'Ivoire, Northern Africa in Morocco, Southeast Asia in the Philippines, and so on and so forth. And in those variety of locations, for which I think I've calculated that I've spent almost 5 years of my life doing field research in a wide variety of settings, I've seen classrooms, and these are as recently as last year, where there's technology that looks like this. So you've got desktops with very small monitors, and as you can see in this girl's hand, a little bit of a throwback to a slide-style phone. To contexts where the schools themselves have no electricity, but families do own telephones, and teachers may even own smartphones. To very high-tech institutions where there's a laptop for every student, power, microphones at every desk, and so on and so forth. And so this has led me to think about what we can do for supporting students across a wide range of places and contexts that go everywhere from the lowest of infrastructures up to the highest of infrastructure availability, and how we can make educational technology work across these sites. And in the talk today, I'm going to go through 2 illustrative projects that look at 2 ends of that spectrum and what we might do based on what we have and what we see in that context. All right. So, project number 1 is called Allo Alphabet, and it's a phone-based literacy intervention in Cote d'Ivoire, where what the students are learning in school is French. And as you can see, this is a lower infrastructure example. So we'll start on what can we do when there is not a lot of technological infrastructure available in the environment. Of course, we start out with the problem at the heart of it. In this case, there's a critical need to support child literacy in Cote d'Ivoire. So from the Global Education Monitoring Report Team in 2015, we see that literacy is a critical precursor for a number of things: future educational attainment, employment, the capacity for individual development, all of the things that we want to see for these young learners. And there's a cost for the country at the same time. 1.2% of the GDP is the cost of literacy. And yet, in Cote d'Ivoire, only 57% of the population over age 15 are literate. And a study that we ourselves ran in the region of the country showed that this is with CM1, which is approximately 3rd grade students. Only 47% were able to read the reverse of that. 47% were only able to read fewer than 5 out of 50 words, and 46% were only able to identify fewer than 4 of 100 letter sounds. So we're struggling here a bit to achieve the goals that the country has set for itself. In literacy in particular, although this is not just the case in literacy in this context. One issue here is that many children in the regions that we were studying in this rural West African context may not actually attend school consistently. So that's one of the challenges. And there's a number of underlying reasons for that, which I'm happy to talk through at length after the talk. But if we are to think about solutions, EdTech solutions used in school are not actually a possibility for this group of learners, given their need to be in and out of the school environment at varying times of the year, whether it's for agricultural reasons, financial reasons, or other. Therefore, one of the solutions that we were looking towards was the opportunities that could be availed by producing technologies that can be used at home. And so when we looked to the literature in this case, what we found was that in many cases, there are technologies that are built for home use that have been designed for literate users in weird contexts. And if you haven't heard the term weird context yet, it's Western educated, industrialized, rich, and developed nations. So the US, Western Europe, Australia, Canada, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of literacy technology that's designed for users in those contexts who have literate parents who can help at home, or the mobile ed tech that exists for other contexts does not involve parents and families. And so this is one of the challenges that we set forth for ourselves in collaboration, first of all, with an existing educational technology company based out of Kenya and Cote d'Ivoire that has phone-based education platform solutions for Africa. We also worked with the Ivorian Ministry of Education, who have a very innovative piloting committee that lets us try new solutions in the country. And then a set of researchers from my co-PI, Kaya Jasinska, to our wonderful project lead, Fabrice Tano, who's an Ivorian PhD candidate, and my student, Michael Medeo. And we worked to address the gaps that we saw by developing a phone-based literacy intervention for phonological awareness and letter sound mapping. So the two things that we saw were missing on that slide a couple minutes ago for children to use at home. And importantly, we also designed a parent support system to go along with this. We developed these systems through a long process in which we did about 8 months of field research over 2 years, doing a contextual inquiry and piloting of a program, where we learned a number of things. For instance, that parents already provide a variety of literacy support at home. And this may be done even if they're not literate themselves. So even just purchasing a blackboard and chalk for their children to practice while they're in the home context, or perhaps engaging an older sibling who had passed a literacy test in high school. So there was a lot of support already happening at home. And you can see here some of the quotes from our participants about the real importance of education in their lives. We found that parents were indeed supportive of using mobile phones for literacy education. And they, in fact, even had mobile phones at home. Now, this is a little bit of a controversial statement because there's a lot of discrepancies in the data around what this technology actually looks like. So do these families have electricity to charge their phones? Where are they charging their phones? How are they getting the SIM cards that are needed to run the phones? I've had ministries of education who have told me that 100% of their population has smartphones. And when we've been on the ground, we see that that's absolutely not true. And basic phones are available in many families, but no one has smartphones. So the data being produced at a country level doesn't always match the reality on the ground. And then even what participants are aspirational towards doesn't always match what they have in hand. And so one of our concerns going in was that there would be any of this infrastructure actually even available. And yet what we found was that there was sufficient access to basic phones, so no data, no internet, that there was technology already there on the ground that parents knew how to use and children knew how to use as well. This also confirmed some of our assumptions about staying at home with the technology. Parents were very concerned about children taking the phones and taking them out of the house with them, unlike some other prior work that has shown that kids going out into the field might have an ability to learn on the phone while they're at rest in their various agricultural tasks. So that was a major concern here. From these 8 months of findings, we developed an age-appropriate early literacy curriculum, which I can go into if anyone's interested. And what we did was to implement it into an adaptive curriculum for mobile IVR, that is interactive voice response. What this meant was that no internet or data were needed in order to access this intervention. It simply went through a phone call. And the phone call could present information and also ask questions and get answers back from the students that it was able to interpret and then adapt the next steps in the curriculum for those students to target exactly the knowledge that they needed. So that was part one. Part two was a parent-facing system that enabled the parents to have access to their children's progress, to learn about the literacy concepts themselves. And this was done for two reasons. One, for them to help support their children with even more knowledge, but also in some cases because the parents wanted to learn literacy while they were at home as well. We then deployed it. We actually, in this case, gave a phone to each child, not because they weren't present in the household, but because we wanted to test the curriculum and the system rather than the interface of the phone. And so we chose a consistent phone that was the most common phone that we saw across all of our users. We did a large set of community support sessions where we worked with teachers, parents, guardians, and siblings to give them as much information or training as they wanted on the phone. So this is on the left is our Ivorian team that's working on this. And I say teachers, even though we did not deploy at schools, because education there is seen as the domain of the school, of the teacher, and they have the authority. So if they weren't on board, this wasn't happening at home anyway. So we are running a study with 1,000 families in 8 villages, about 4 schools per village, with 871 children that were pre-tested and surveyed and 737 phones distributed and trained with families to use Allo Alphabet. And then again, this is important to mention because we never want to leave people with the impression that this type of a system is just magically runs by itself. We had an Allo Alphabet team of support who stayed connected to families during the study to offer tech support, answer any questions, until this got integrated well into the environment. And some of the findings, again, I'm trying to move through this quickly. We're trying to get onto a discussion. So if there's more you want to know, definitely ask me questions later. We found 10.6% improvement in phonemic awareness at the end line of our study. Here's the distribution, and a 47.6% improvement in letter reading. So these, again, are the foundations for literacy. And one of the issues here is French is not always the language used at home. And so mapping to these phonemic constructs and letters even is really important as a foundation for learning an additional language. We also found that parents recruited many family members to help with the literacy content and even with the IVR system usage. In some cases, there's been reports that children are more adept with tech than their families. In this case, that was not true, and likely due to the value of the phone to the family. So children were not typically allowed to play around with the phones unless it was for a deliberate purpose. And so what this means is they didn't have more tech knowledge than their parents did. So their parents, older siblings, aunts, and uncles provided that knowledge for them. We also found that family members helped with motivation, structuring, and even giving explicit instruction, even for the French literacy skills. So here you can see an aunt who was called in to help reinforce some of the literacy concepts while the child was on the phone. And she says, you have to listen carefully. Which one is the right answer among these three words? So she's helping with the format of the questions as well. Even though she may not have been the one responsible for their education, parents viewed this as an opportunity to bring in additional community members. One important factor to note here is that we've been talking about COVID. What happens during a school disruption? So I can't present to you our data from COVID times yet, but we think that this is we have the same result here. But we did actually find that a year ago, last fall, there was a 2-month teacher strike, which is not an uncommon occurrence here. And so we looked at students' phone use during that time. Now you can see the green here is normal schooling. The red is holidays. And what we heard during this time was that parents said, you know, you're on break, it's time for fun, don't practice, don't use the phone. So the usage dropped over that holiday. But what you can see in the blue during the strike is that usage actually went up. And parents viewed that as a time where their children were not getting the education they needed, and they turned to the phone more frequently for support that the children were not getting. So this is, I think, a really fun project and really fantastic that I think has some impact. But the coolest next challenges we're taking on here in this environment are to move on to some more of the root causes here. And on the left-hand side, what you see is we're working on a teacher professional development tool so that we can actually work on improving what's happening within the schools when the children get there. So the teachers right now have very little opportunity for support and professional development. They're often in these rural locations that cannot get visits from many school officials. So we're working on a chatbot that links to FAQ about good teaching practices, goal setting for their professional development, builds a community through the sharing of stories and engagement. And the teachers themselves, 98% of them have smartphones. So we're able to work with Facebook Messenger, which is a common technology that they all use, to actually deploy a professional development support tool here. But we're not doing that without looking at what is the root cause of children not being in school. And one of those major issues is money. And so on the right-hand side, the second major arm of our study is partnering with a group that does cash transfers, which is another term for universal basic income. You may have heard that. And what we're doing here is looking at whether money can get kids to school, and then professional development can increase the quality of schooling that the children are getting. So all of this is in that low infrastructure environment. So I'm going to quickly go through a higher infrastructure environment and an example of some tech we're working on there. And that is EduSense and Class Insight, and a whole different set of folks who are working on that project with me, including sensors guys, privacy and security, designers, and so on and so forth. And where we started here was thinking about, additionally, this idea of professional development for teachers, but now thinking about, okay, what can we do that's even greater in contexts that have a higher level of infrastructure available? And the important thing here is that teachers really have the greatest impact on what students do and what concepts they think about. And so if we can help them support more equitable outcomes, if we can help the teachers do that, we can magnify teachers' impact. And so we started with this basic theory of how teachers engage. They take action in the classroom, they reflect on it, they plan their next day, and then they act again. And we started to look at, well, what might happen when you introduce technology into that cycle, during which teachers very rarely get feedback on what they're doing. We actually looked at this. We have a paper in submission right now, not just in teaching, by the way. We looked at other professions as well. So we looked at therapists and nurses and what might happen if we intervened in this cycle for teachers. So here's some of the early preliminary work we did to investigate whether the idea of professional informatics, so similar to personal informatics where you're tracking with your Fitbit your number of steps or how many calories you're eating, but now tracking your professional practices might actually have some traction. We found a wide set of findings in this early investigation that I'm not going to talk about here, but we found intersections between people's experience and their professional development. We found some concerns around how things were measured and what inferences were being made. And of course, as you might expect, around data sharing, privacy, control, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot there we won't get into, but it's all very interesting stuff. We found enough evidence to suggest that we could move forward with this idea. And then we built EduSense for classroom data collection. And so we looked at extracting meaningful features from the classroom. Here is the very tiny camera setup that we have. So front and back of the classroom has this camera, but it's then connected into the wired network that the school has. So that could be a high school, it could be a university, but there needs to be a wired connection that takes you to a central set of servers that are collecting data or providing internet access to the rooms. In this system, now we've got these cameras, and what we have to do next is to find out what's going on in these rooms, because no classrooms are duplicates of one another. So any algorithms that we would use in order to identify what's happening in the classroom need to rely on a basic understanding of what's going on in that class. And so here's a quick video that shows that process. So we start by installing cameras front and back of room. These cameras have microphones in them as well. We set up a set of markers all around the room on the important features. So whiteboards, projector screens, student desks, so on and so forth. And then our software captures this classroom. And then we can take those markers away. So that's a one-time thing. And then what happens is we start to extract some features from that. So in this case, this is not a real classroom, but you can see the system's able to detect faces. It doesn't do facial recognition, just detection. So we're finding students, but we don't know who they are. We're seeing where their bodies are, and we can see their facial expressions, eyes on, and so on and so forth. And then what we have to do is get the meaningful features out of that. So what can we tell to a teacher that will actually matter? So here on the left, you can see one thing, which is movement. So the top left image is of a teacher that stays behind the podium for the entire class period. On the bottom left is a teacher who moves more along the front of the class and then takes a few dives into the center to look at some student work, the red being the most frequent location of that instructor. On the right-hand side, you see people and poses, so hand raises and so on and so forth. And then the location of students in the classroom, which we also think is an issue of equity. So are the students in the back getting the same experience as the student in the front? Are they participating as much? Are they as engaged? Is the instructor reaching out to them? And so on and so forth. And we also see that gaze happening. So on the left-hand side here, you see, again, that one part of the classroom is getting far more of the attention from the instructor than the other side of the classroom. And attention is a very, very strong correlate with instructor attention with student attention, and in fact, even with their learning outcomes. You can see we also see student gaze too. So you can tell where they're looking. Are they looking at the board, at the podium, and how long are they staying, and so on and so forth. And then the final thing we're working on is the audio features. So importantly, we want to be able to actually listen to some of the things that are being said and help the teacher to sort through them afterwards. Now, this is something that a teacher might do in any normal case. They might videotape their classroom, watch it and see what happened. They might listen to what was being said and could it be said better. They might even do that with a professional who's helping them to do that reflection, but it typically happens about once per semester. And our question was, can we get this information to them in a way they can use even on a daily basis? And so using Clark and Hollingsworth model of teacher professional development, we've built on this to insert places in which a system might actually be able to support better learning. And here you can just see quickly the interface that we have for teachers. So this is at a very high level across a lot of different class periods. But it also, in this lower left-hand side, teachers can focus in, for instance, on the last class they had. And here's a visualization of how much the teacher was talking in blue and how much the students were talking in red. And so you see the teacher talk is about 94% of the class and student talk is 6%. So this is real data from a classroom, and this is not atypical, even for teachers who are often at times attempting to do something like active learning. Then in some instances, they could even dive in and look at it across time. So the blue contributions, again, from the teacher, but with codes of what they were doing. And then maybe even the transcript. So you could actually dive in and see specifically what was being said in order to know, like, what was it about that question that I asked that helped the students or didn't? So I'm happy to go through some of our results from teachers, but just at the very high level, they saw and noticed different things at different grain sizes in their data. So whether this is a teacher with 6 years of experience who says, my first reaction is the gray is me talking, which seems like a really high amount, too high. Yeah. So, experienced teacher, but still seeing things even at that top level. And then, of course, when you get to that medium grain of looking at what the codes are over time, it'd be nice to see some students answering, and are they giving me open-ended statements or closed-ended? And then at the bottom, you can see how that leads the teacher themselves to set goals for their next class. So that's one of the things that we worked on here was helping teachers set goals. So we don't want the system to impose goals on them. We want teachers to be able to set their own and to think about what they want to work on for their class. And so then you might be able to see, if you use this goal setting, you might be able to see exactly what happened in that goal over a period of time. We're playing around a bit with this goal setting. So, here's a way that you could do it in a template. Or a teacher could say, I don't want to use the template, and they can try just typing in their own, but there may be differences in how we're able to actually give them automatically extracted data. But in any case, this is again an example of keeping a human in that loop. They talk to us about concerns about measurement and inference, and they want to make inferences about their own data. So this is a way to let them have that agency and control when they're looking at this, rather than the system saying, you failed. What did I fail on? And why do you think so? Is what the teachers will say. Okay, so new challenges there. One of the cool things we're looking at here is creating a digital twin of your classroom. So now that we have all of this data, could you go back and actually relive your class? So now instead of just watching a video of it, you could actually put on a VR helmet and get in there up close and personal, maybe even walk around and take the perspective of a student from the back of your class. So this builds on work from like Jeremy Bailenson, for instance. So can you take on a perspective of a different person in your experience, perhaps somebody who's been a bit marginalized in your classroom or who's not speaking? Why aren't they speaking? And maybe it's because there's something about your activity that, that changes their perceptions. And then, of course, COVID. Now we've got everybody learning from home. And one of the major issues is even just, are people checking in? Are they coming to school, and when and where and why? And so one of the things we've shifted to a little bit this fall is thinking about how do we help teachers track those sorts of things that are crucial in finding that sweet spot of technological availability and utility to the teacher when they're trying to manage 100 other things. And particularly this is important in the school districts we're working with in San Diego, where sometimes upward of 50% of their students are not able to check into class. But were coming in person when in person was available. I talked to some of you earlier about a totally different cool project that's on the higher infrastructure, higher tech spectrum, socialrobots.tech, but I think we'll skip that for now, just for time's sake, and just come back to the takeaways here, which for me are that we can find ways to provide opportunities for equity at every end of this infrastructure spectrum. In the first case, perhaps by using tech that's already there in the environment that doesn't require parents or families, kids, teachers to use something that's new and they've never experienced before, all the way up to places that might be more willing to experiment or have more freedom in their structure and schedule to do that. And so that requires at least three things. One is doing context-sensitive design. So we've done a lot of work to make sure that these tech options actually work in that setting. Number two, thinking very deeply about the physical infrastructure that's available. So what can you put on the client side and what can go on the server side so that you can keep AI if needed or other high-level technologies, but they go on the side where the users never really know that that's what's happening. Third is the human infrastructure. So humans always in the loop. In both to support technology when it fails, but also to go above and beyond what any technology can do. They know their context best. They know the children and are able to really care for them in a way that technology probably won't be able to do. And then one that I haven't really talked about, which is a need for policy and regulation. And so this came not only out of those interviews around professional informatics and making sure that data privacy and security is in place, that ownership is in the right place in order for people to feel comfortable and to be supported in their practices, but also to make sure that those efforts towards equity are strongly in place. We know that equity won't be achieved organically. We actually have to work hard for it. You know, whether that's the government getting zero-rated educational interventions, so giving students for free some of these technologies where they might have had to pay for data to download them or use them, or just creating those policies that put in place the opportunity for all learners to learn. Okay, I think I'm a little bit over, but so we'll wrap there. And there's a million people who have contributed to all of this research. I can't possibly thank them all, but here's a subset, and a subset of our collaborators along the bottom. And thank you so much for engaging with me on this journey, and I'd love to take your questions.
Great. You can only hear me clapping, but thank you so much, Amy. That was a great talk. So I encourage people to put their questions in the chat so that I can relay them to Amy. And also don't forget to introduce yourself in the chat to let me know whether you're a student, faculty, etc., so that I can relay those questions to Amy. And while people are busy typing those in, I thought I'd start off with a question, which was, it was very impressive, especially with your low infrastructure work, that you have such a large deployment in so many different villages, so many different schools. And I was curious, how did you sort of get that set up with recruiting and sort of buy-in? You also showed us the tech support that you need to kind of do that. How much is sort of like recruiting and getting buy-in from local communities, and how much do you have to kind of do to manage it, particularly if you're not in Côte d'Ivoire all the time?
Right. Yes. I try to be there as much as possible, but can't be there all the time, and even less so in the last 9 months. So this is why I wanted to promote the team there, because it's really wide-ranging group effort. We would not be doing this if it weren't for the EdTech company with a base in Côte d'Ivoire, if we didn't have the support of the Ministry of Education, as well as a large team that is working there and ranges from folks who live in Abidjan, the capital, well, the business capital of Côte d'Ivoire, who are, in a PhD program and studying these rural cocoa farming communities, but also lots of research assistants from the region of cocoa growing who get a lot of training by our team and are really our source of insight into the community and who work very closely with us. So, while one of our collaborators is a co-PI, I would say, as he's moving forward, there's lots of difficulties to actually achieving this, but I think that's one of them, is making sure the team is in place.
Right. And I guess I was also curious, how long did that initial deployment that you talked about, how long was it?
So we have now run a pilot for 6 weeks. So even our pilot was a reasonable chunk of time, but our current study has been running for a year and a half with various interruptions, as we said, due to strikes and the COVID pandemic and so on and so forth. But yeah, so it will be running for 3 years by the end of it, and we're looking to continue. Wow.
That's great. Again, if anyone else wants to ask questions, you can. Otherwise, I'm going to continue because I have lots of questions for Amy. I was also curious on your higher infrastructure side. So you showed Class Insight, and this introduces concept of professional informatics. And I know you had mentioned this earlier, but how are you dealing with the privacy concerns? So you're collecting video and audio, it sounds like, of students and teachers in the class. So I guess I was curious, are you envisioning that this would be collected all the time, or how are you sort of protecting privacy, and do you also have like consent measures in place?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes. So that's a great question, and it looks different depending on the context we're in. So our K-12 installation looks different from our university installation. So on one hand, you have over 18s students in the class, and the other are minors. Interestingly, the K-12 situation, they're more liberal about the audio data and they're more concerned about the video data. And it's the reverse in the university. They take video everywhere all the time. They're not concerned about that. What they are concerned about is what the students are saying. And so the video is far easier to obscure. So we don't save any faces. We don't actually save any of the visual data itself. We only save those key points. So you saw the little markers around the face and the body points, and then we discard the video data. So that's one way to keep it. We don't know what students are in the class and so on and so forth. So we can't match them to individuals. The audio data is a little bit trickier, and that's something that we're working with and is more in, we're going back and forth between the Wizard of Oz stage and the actual deployment in order to make sure that those concerns are addressed, because we think we have a better handle on the video right now.
Right, that makes total sense. I apologize. I'm also having kid meltdowns here in the background. But so Sarah Sebo, who's a faculty member here, asked this question. Can you speak to the influence of the community around a student, so family members, on the learning experience and outcomes for the student? How might students without physically present community connect with others to promote their learning? For example, if the student during COVID has working parents.
Yeah, we think this is a real challenge, and more specifically in some communities than others. So that's an issue where it might not be the infrastructure of the physical infrastructure, but the human infrastructure that you really need to be aware of. So in our communities in Cote d'Ivoire or in Tanzania, there's always adults around, there's always other peers around, it's never in question. But here in the US, that social isolation is a bigger challenge. And so I think that in many of our technologies, we build in a social component. So the robots that I very briefly showed, the girls that are working with this system have collaborative exercises that they use, even as they build and program individually. They're all sharing, connecting, and this is actually in some cases facilitated by them being at home during COVID, where they can make connections to other learners that are more similar to themselves. So this is particularly important for marginalized populations to be able to connect with another similar community. So I think the recommendation there is be aware of the human infrastructure. And if it's not present in person, find the ways to make those connections online.
Great. That's a great answer. So we have another question who is from one of our YouTube viewers, Alexander Binion. He said, thank you, or he or she said, thank you for the talk. Do you feel improving the quality of educational tools increases disparity in quality of education between high and low resource learners? High-tech stuff often seems to widen gaps.
Yes, I think that is a really excellent point and something that we have to be aware of as we're developing these things. And, even the last few months, we've spent a lot of time thinking about that. And that is one way to look at it, that, introducing technology can widen gaps. It can also help to close gaps. And so, for instance, these learners in Cote d'Ivoire who are at home and whose schools are closed have no other option. Introducing a technology that they already have in their homes and that can support their literacy, the continuity of their literacy education, is something that we found that can work for almost every student in this community. Even if their families don't have a phone, there are neighbors who do. And we found that, the very, very few students who didn't have a phone in their family were able to go next door, or, in that case, they're living very close and already grouping in to do many chores in the neighborhood. And so they're actually able to catch up in ways that wouldn't be possible without the technology. Even in the US, if you think about the high infrastructure scenario, it's not the case that every student in that class is getting an equal opportunity. And we know that marginalized students within a classroom, even in a high income area, do not always get the same attention. And so we can think, I think, in two ways. One is whether we're increasing or decreasing disparity across contexts, and whether we're increasing or decreasing disparity within a context. And so that, again, is why I think this policy and regulation is also such an important component of this.
Great. Yeah. And I like what you said about within context versus across context. So we have quite a few more questions. So from Blazer, another faculty member here who you've met, he's asking sort of a follow-up on that privacy question. He says, super cool projects. So when you were presenting the work on sensors in classrooms, so you already said this to us a few minutes ago, you mentioned you're not doing face recognition, but face detection.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned it was because of potential privacy concerns. But some of the metrics and data that you showed later, like the transcripts of what you was said in the classroom, did attribute the speech to, say, student 12. So Blaise was curious, how do you, balance that privacy and actionable feedback in these projects as you navigated these decisions? And, in follow-up again to my question, like what data do teachers seem to want that you may not want to collect because of privacy reasons?
Yeah, great question. And that student 12 was in response to a request from teachers. So they really want to know, what is this student saying? Am I supporting this student? Am I, how often is this other student contributing? And am I ignoring them? They want to know, am I distributing my attention across gender and across ethnic background? And we're very hesitant about that because I don't want to get into the space where we're identifying individual students. But that in particular is part of our Wizard of Oz system, where we're not doing it automatically, but we're having a human go through and do it. And one of the reasons for that is to look and see, does it make a difference if we know? And if it doesn't, then let's leave it out. But as a request from a teacher, from many, many teachers, we wanted to try out and see what is the value added versus the trade-offs, the risk of privacy concerns. So I think that's something to continue exploring here, but we don't have a production level system that would do that yet. And I wouldn't want to send it out there that way either.
Right. Great. That's terrific to know that was the Wizard of Oz, but you're still thinking about it moving forward. So we had another question from YouTube from Benjamin Gurini. And this Benjamin says, this may be unrelated, but you mentioned COVID-19 as a school disruption. Are you continuing the study now during COVID? And if so, what are you going to change during COVID?
Yes. So I'm guessing you mean about the Côte d'Ivoire study with the low-tech phones.
I assume so. Yes.
Yeah. So COVID has been an interesting disruption. We definitely found that students were continuing or increasing their use of technology during that pandemic time, but it's also been a time of great confusion. And so you have differing statements from teachers on when schools will resume, from administrations, differing views for parents on, if we're out for that long and we don't know when we're coming back, then we should all go do our agricultural tasks or others. And so the students do have the technology right now, and we are doing data collection during this time, but I'd say it's a bit of a mixed bag. I definitely increases in use in some cases, but not in every case. And in some, that's because, the phone gets left at home and the family goes out to the field. So it's the length of time of the disruption has really had an impact on what happens at an individual level. Right.
Yeah, I think like everyone, it seems like it's a real challenge to deal with these kinds of studies, especially since you already have remote for you with managing a study like that, and then all these kind of issues coming up in general. So I think we have time for one final question. So I wanted to ask, just again, building on the privacy aspects of everything, is who do you envision will use Class Insight? Is it directed towards the teacher for professional informatics, or would you see schools buying into this as well? And the reason I ask is something you had mentioned in our one-on-one, which is, how do you see this data being used by someone who's not the teacher? So for example, would you see schools using this to evaluate teachers and what they're doing? And, is that a good or bad thing?
Yes. So if we go back, our interview study here looked at therapists, nurses, teachers, and police officers. And this was one of the places, most places we got very similar results. So everybody thought this was way better than their existing professional development, in particular because it's personalized and they feel like they actually don't get anything out of regular old professional development that just, in fact, some of our participants said, I could teach it myself. What's the point? They all had concerns about, are you measuring this thing accurately? And what if you're not? But actually, the final one was where there were big discrepancies by profession on how they felt about data sharing, privacy control, and so on. And so, for instance, in some professions, they already feel like they're being monitored all the time anyway. Even the police officers, for instance, said, we have body cams, like everybody knows everything I'm doing. It doesn't matter. And I think I can prove that I'm, a better officer than they think I am by using this data. So they wanted the administration to have their data. That was not true for teachers. They said there was only one participant who said, yeah, I can go take like a cool class that I gave and now, it's my control. Otherwise, they come observe me whenever they want. I don't have control over that. But now I can take it and go say, hey, check out this. Like I did this great stuff in class. No one else said that. They were all far more concerned that it would be used punitively. And that's part of that system that's set up around education today, where there's a lot of concern, not that teachers get promoted because of doing a good job, but that they get fired because of not doing the job that they're expected to do, which is often not under their control. So right now, this is a research system for sure. Is this even useful to participants? But I think that brings us back to this policy and regulation. Is there a way for teachers to own this data of themselves completely and only choose to share it if they want to? Because I think that's the only way this is going to work. Great.
Thank you so much. That was a great answer. And I totally agree with what you're saying. That was a great talk. Thank you so much, Amy. I know that, I'd like with everyone else to thank you for visiting us at UChicago today. We're really excited that you came and spoke to us today about what you're working on. And I think it's super interesting, as I know many of the faculty and students probably think as well. And so now we're going to wrap up the talk and then have you go over to our student roundtable so that you can meet with some of our students. But thank you so much. It's a great talk.
It was great to see you all, and hopefully in person at some point in the near future.
Yeah, we'd love to have you out at UChicago in person when you can.
All right, great. Okay. Looking forward to meeting the students next.
Awesome. So yeah, I'll meet you over there in a bit.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Amy. Bye. Thanks, everyone.